the Southwest, some of the air is unfit to breathe. This is a story of a disease with many names. This is the story of valley fever. In this short film, we will be discussing what we believe this disease to be today, what the medical community thought it to be in the early and mid 20th century, and a few peculiar things to note regarding the historic medical journal entries. So what are our top people currently saying about it? The official medical term for valley fever is known as coccidioidomycosis. Coccidioidomycosis progresses into more advanced stages with time, acute coccidioidomycosis being the earliest stage, chronic coccidioidomycosis, and finally disseminated coccidioidomycosis. According to the Mayo Clinic, the term valley fever now refers more specifically to the initial infectious stage. Valley fever is a fungal infection caused by the fungus Coccidioides immitis that affects the lungs of its victims. It is now known that the spores of the coccidioidal fungus reside in the dirt and dust and is contracted by breathing in contaminated air. However, this was not always recognized for certain. Communicability questions were obviously of great importance to researchers upon its discovery in 1892. It was unknown if valley fever was spread from person to person, contracted through consumption of food or water, airborne, or even if the disease was genetically related. As the journal article Coccidioidal Sensitivity Among School Children, which was written by Dr. John Emmett, shows in the late 1952, studies were still being conducted to determine if dirt and airborne dust were culprits of the spread of the disease. The American Journal of Public Health article points out that its author, Dr. John Emmett, helped in conducting a study involved 1,869 grade school children ages 5 to 17. The children were pupils of 3 city schools. School C was located on an unpaved, hence dustier area of the schools than schools A and B. He later went on to conclude, the significantly higher percentages of positive reactors in school C is much reasonably accounted for by the fact that the children attended it lived in an unpaved, dustier section of the city. The symptoms of coccidioidomycosis increase with time. For acute coccidioidomycosis, symptoms include fever, cough, chest pain, chills, night sweats, headache, fatigue, joint aches, and red rash-like spots. As the disease progresses, it becomes chronic coccidioidomycosis. New symptoms are added, including weight loss, blood-tinged sputum, and nodules appearing in the lungs. If the disease becomes serious enough, it becomes disseminated coccidioidomycosis. The patient can also develop painful skin and bone lesions, painful swollen joints, and meningitis. According to Dr. Charles E. Smith, one of the leading experts in coccidioidomycosis research, in 1940 to most doctors it was noteworthy because of the bizarre character of the fungus as well as its 50% fatality rate. Throughout the years, coccidioidomycosis has been known by many names: desert fever, Sanhoquin fever, desert rheumatism, the bumps, and of course, valley fever. The reality, however, was that oftentimes the sickness was never diagnosed at all. As journals point out repeatedly, many times acute coccidioidomycosis went undiagnosed because of its similar symptoms shared with influenza. Typically, people without means to pay for quality medical care continue to go to work when they are sick. It is believed that many cases of valley fever were never reported simply because the victim assumed that they had the flu. As Dr. Charles Smith points out, many times the sickness was also misdiagnosed by medical professionals of the day for the same reasons. Sadly, not all those who contracted the fungus were able to fight it and keep the disease in its acute stages. For those patients with more advanced cases, doctors continued to misdiagnose the condition. Even after the invention of the X-ray, many patients were misdiagnosed as having tuberculosis.
it would not be until the development of skin test, which coincidentally is administered in the same fashion as a tuberculosis test, that the diagnosis would not become so hit and miss. In medical studies, it is important to gather as much information as possible. To that end, doctors examine statistics about the disease based on a number of variables such as race, locale, and the gender, to name a few. The historic journals, of course, conducted their studies in the same manner. However, the journals mention little, if anything, about real and potential socioeconomic theories of the day. In fact, Dr. Smith proclaimed in one of his articles that results for testing presented few outward variables within the military, as black servicemen had the same accommodations as their white counterpart. One day in a U.S. history class will prove that that idea was most likely incorrect on the part of Dr. Smith. Even today, the Mayo Clinic warns that one is more susceptible to valley fever if they are, quote, black or Filipino. This does not mean that one cannot get sick if they are any other race, just apparently less likely. Avoiding socioeconomic differences between races affects real medicine negatively in this way. Objectively, it makes no sense to assume that a single-celled fungus can discern between races, as well as choose to settle on what the fungus would deem an inferior race for its purposes if absolutely necessary. Not only would this have to be true, but this single cell would have to be aware that options were limited and also convey to other daughter cells. Of course, the more likely explanation for the statistical likelihoods found would have to be the differences in environment and other socioeconomic factors affected by the person's race. In conclusion, it is important as historians, as well as citizens of the world, to remember the medical science and technology is always at its cutting edge, but remember to take that science with a grain of salt. Much to the medical community's credit, however, they are doing their job is definitely working. People are living now longer than ever before and much healthier to boot. But let us also not forget that what is viewed almost comically in the realm of history was once viewed as the most informed and cutting-edge medicine of the day. There is always room to improve. When we begin to change the way we think about people, we can change not just society, but perhaps our medicine too. And with that, I would just like to say that I have very much enjoyed this class. I wish you a very Merry Christmas, Kwanzaa, and a joyous Festivus. Good luck on your New Year's resolutions as well.